All right, peace. So now this will probably be the last video that I post for tonight. I just wanted to post this video because this was a very interesting story that I saw on the morning news in regards to a quote unquote ancient Egyptian relic that was found. And I just wanted to touch on a few things because you're going to notice some things in the story. One of those things being was known as typification. And typification basically is based off of the premise of artistic license. And what that basically means is that when artifacts are found, they're normally hidden away. Now, when you go to a museum, most of the artifacts that you see on the museum floor are forgeries or fabrications. They hire artists to remake or remodel artifacts from the ancient world or paintings from the ancient world, which are mostly totally completely fabricated, to depict on the museum floor so that you can get a disparate understanding of history than what actually occurred. All right, it's to perpetuate a narrative, right? That narrative being mostly that people of color had no place in history and that everything comes from the so-called Caucasian. You know, this started in the late 1800s with the age of archaeology. They would find artifacts and they would hide them. And then they would remodel them or remake them to include themselves. So now we're going to go through this. They found an Egyptian shroud, quote unquote Egyptian shroud. And we're going to see how they have an artist reworking the shroud. So let's see.
Museum curators in Scotland discovered an ancient Egyptian burial cloth, thousands of years old. The full-length shroud shows the deceased as an Egyptian god. It was used to cover the mummified body.
Now, as you can see, there is a Caucasian woman that is totally redoing the face of the shroud. Now, when you look closer, you can see that there are darker marks on the face, but whatever object that she's using there is being used to clean off the darker marks and make the face appear lighter. All right. This is a common practice. It's known as typification. You can see by the nose that he has a very prominent wide nose. I'm not going to say that those are quote unquote people of color features. But you can see that she has altered the lips and she's lightening the skin. That is the job of a typification artist. All right. They hire artists out of art school to remodel a lot of these artifacts, if not totally create brand new ones. All right.
Jonathan Vigliotti is in London with how this rare artifact was found still in remarkable condition.
And that's also why, you know, not to go off topic, but that's also why a lot of you brothers have a hard time grasping or understanding some of the things that I say about what occurred during the medieval time period, because true history is not for public consumption. All right. That's something that you either are allowed to find or you're not. Like, you have to really be looking for it to understand it and find it. Like what I said about the so-called Black Plague or bubonic plague. You know, if time permits, I'm going to definitely do something about that in the Middle Ages so that brothers get an understanding that, yes, the majority of blacks here in the Americas came from Europe, and we came here during the Middle Ages, or you had a lot of so-called black people who came here from Assyria after the Assyrian captivity, and we were known as Incas and Aztecs and Mayans because those people were so-called black people. All right, as were most of the so-called Native American tribes, particularly along the East Coast, east of the Mississippi. All right, now you had the Native Americans of the plains, what they call the Plains Indians. They were mostly Mongoloid, but the so-called natives east of the Mississippi were predominantly quote unquote Negroid. All right, and then you had tribes that were kind of a mixture of the two, but the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Incas and Tainos, etc., were all so-called Negro, quote unquote. All right. But yes, that's why a lot of you brothers have a hard time understanding it, because they've gone to great pains to do things like this, which is known as typification, or I believe it's called iconoclasm also. where they take a lot of the ancient depictions, and you see that a lot with what was called the Russian icons or the Byzantine icons. They totally paint over them to make them appear Caucasian. All right, so let's see what they do with this.
Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning. This piece of ancient history was discovered in an old, crumpled up and torn paper bag. It had been hidden away in the museum archives.
Now you notice he said it was hidden away in the museum archives. Like I said, they take the actual artifacts and they hide them in the back or under the museum. All right. And a lot of what's on the museum floor are total fabrications.
Get this, during World War II and only recently discovered. It looks like garbage just waiting to be tossed out. But after more than 70 years sitting on a shelf in the National Museum of Scotland.
Now look at the more original version of the face. You can see it's much darker. That's why I said when they showed the so-called artist on it, her job is to lighten it. You understand?
Of Scotland's storage, a team of curious curators finally peeked inside.
It was really exciting to be able to get it out. And
Dr. Margaret Maitland made the discovery.
a lot of people don't realize you can make discoveries in museum collections as well.
That highlight, a 2,000-year-old mummy shroud, a type of linen cloth used to wrap the mummified bodies of high-ranking Egyptians.
Now, the narrator states that the shroud is 2,000 years old. So the shroud could also be a depiction of somebody who was of mixed, quote-unquote, mixed race origin. The Macedonians had invaded Egypt by that time, and the ruling dynasties and the ruling classes were mostly based off of the line of the Macedonians, who were Caucasians. They came into Egypt during the time of Ptolemy, who was one of the generals of Alexander, and they went about trying to totally adopt the ancestral Egyptian culture, and they also intermarried with many of the native Egyptian people. Right, who we're going to see who the actual descendants of the ancient Egyptians are a little later in this video. But they intermixed with a lot of them, and they created that kind of a quote-unquote mulatto ruling class, of which Cleopatra was a descendant. So this person could easily be, who's being depicted, could easily also be of that lineage.
Dr. Maitland's shroud was so fragile, it took 24 hours of humidifying to unwrap.
Each fold that we unfolded, revealing another part of the shroud, was just so...
See, this person here looks like a so-called mixed race person. Now, I don't know if those two black things protruding out to the side, if that's part of the headdress or if that might be braids sticking out the side. But as you can see by the nose and the facial features, it looks like a quote-unquote so-called mulatto. Kind of resembles Derek Jeter.
So exciting to see his face emerge.
Maitland says the final result was so well preserved they could even read the name of the deceased as Iamka. And as it turned...
Now look at this bust of an actual ancient Egyptian. You could tell this is real because one of the main things that they do is they purposefully chip the nose off so that you have a hard time telling if it is a person of quote-unquote Negroid or quote-unquote dark African descent. And we're going to see later on who those people actually are today.
Turns out the museum already had relics of his well-studied parents. His father, a high-ranking Egyptian official.
This person also clearly a person of so-called color. Right, you can see the nose and the lips. Most likely, a darker skinned man, a person of who will be called today a so-called black African.
Mount Suef, and his mother Tanuat. Mother and father were put on display, while son, for some reason, was overlooked and went into storage. But now, decades later, this ancient family tree pieced back together.
Now you can look and see that the father looks very, very much like a so-called black African. The mother is depicted with skin pigment, but the son, for some strange reason, looks extremely light. Now when we do a close-up, we can see that they have a brush there, and there are darker pigments right under the nose and right under the eyes, or pardon me, under the eyebrows, that they're cleaning off with that brush. What is what they call a renewal, right? They're doing an artistic renewal on the depiction. But it is what it is. All right.
They hoped these objects would allow them to live forever, and at least they can live on through these incredible objects.
And the shroud officially goes on display today. The museum still has over 11 million pieces from all over the world in storage, so who knows what other treasures are waiting to be discovered.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now listen to that. They said that they have over 11 million pieces in storage. So how many artifacts from around the world do they have? That shows you how much knowledge they have of ancient history that they don't tell you about, because they cannot possibly put all that on the open museum floor for people to view. All right. So that's how they take culture. Like, I have a brother who keeps asking me, how do we create a culture? And I'm going to address that soon when I do the responding to your comments video. All right. But your culture is based off of where you're from and how you're forced to live. Your culture is broken by traumatic events, meaning your people being conquered. All right. So really the only way to restore a culture or regenerate a culture is through the oppressive culture that's over you being destroyed, or you being put through such a traumatic event that you're forced to change how you live, how you think, and how you respond to adverse situations. All right. But let's continue on.
Yeah.
All right, Jonathan, thank you.
We have our own expert here, don't we?
I was going to say,
I had no
Alex is
clue,
tingling at the table because you majored in what?
Well, for 1 year, I was
Okay.
an Egyptology major. My hieratic and Coptic
So what do you
are a
make
little
of this
rustic.
story?
Yes.
Don't throw away the paper bag.
Yeah, that's
Also,
good.
Indiana Jones, that last scene when the Ark of the Covenant is shuttled away. You never know what's in those museum warehouses. Treasures.
Their own collection.
Their own collection, right?
I would have thrown away a crumpled up paper bag. You would have opened it up. I
Found
get it.
shroud.
I get it.
You never know where you might find a shroud.
That's right. Coming up next.
But that's the point. Like, even she just touched on at the end of the film Indiana Jones, and they put that in there on purpose when they rolled the Ark of the Covenant in there. And the Caucasian man does not have the Ark of the Covenant. But anyway, they rolled the Ark in there in the movie into the warehouse, and it's just in there with a bunch of other artifacts. So that's one of the ways that they're telling you that the version of history that's studied in schools is totally fabricated. It's not true. All right. And Lord willing, when I start to do the series on the Middle Ages, you're going to see that the things that we're taught about the medieval time period and the age of slavery and things like that. The majority is either fabricated or highly, highly exaggerated. They did not bring 50 million so-called black people just from one small location on the west coast of Africa on sailboats. All right, brothers, it didn't go down like that. But anyway, so now just continuing on from the previous segment, I just wanted to bring out this story that was also on the morning news, because a lot of so-called black men today, especially a lot of so-called pro-black men today, like to push the totally unfounded and nonsensical belief or rhetoric that blacks of America are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians, and they do it based off of the premise that they were black and we're black, so we must be the Egyptians. No, that's not how it works. There are thousands of different tribes in Africa. There are thousands of different tribes of color across the world. You can't just pick the ancient Egyptians. It doesn't work like that. But this feature is going to show you who the descendants of the actual ancient Egyptians are. All right. They're known as the Nilotic peoples, Nilotic, the Nilotic peoples. All right. Particularly the Maasai and the Dinka tribe, Dinka, and the Watusi tribe. Those are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians. Right. Now you have other tribes like the Nuer tribe, Nuer, and a lot of other tribes that are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians, and also are the descendants of the ancient Cushites. All right. They're known today as the Nilotic peoples. Right. They live in the Great Lakes region in so-called Africa, around Kenya, the Sudan, Tanzania, Chad, etc., around that area. All right, so we're going to see who those people are today.
All right, now to this story. A family torn apart by war in South Sudan is reunited more than 3 years later. The three boys were living in a refugee camp in Juba. They thought their mother was dead. Well, we followed them as the Red Cross flew them 300 miles to see and hug their mother again. Deborah Pata is in Juba, South Sudan, with the emotional reunion. Deborah, good morning.
Good morning. The mother of these three young boys was attending a wedding miles away when the country was plunged into civil war.
The country wasn't plunged into civil war. There was destabilization that was put on that country because of the oil. All right. Whenever you see these countries that talk about they're in civil war, those are the Western powers trying to destabilize the country so that they can plunder the oil or some other natural resource. Like I stated before, wars are never fought over people. They're fought over resources. All right. Like the Civil War. The Civil War was not fought over freeing so-called blacks. It was fought to make sure that they could bring in a national bank. That's what that was done for. Most of the abolitionists from the North were agents of the international bankers. Their job was to antagonize the South and get the North to try to force the South to give up their slaves so that a war could start. Right? That was done on the North side. On the southern portion of the United States, they started the Knights of the Golden Circle, which were the precursor to the Ku Klux Klan. They were the ones who wanted the South to secede from the Union. But not to digress. Point being is this. Anytime you see civil war in a country, it's over resources. So the Western powers, they want the oil from the Sudan. All right, but we're going to see who the descendants of the ancient Egyptians are.
Labour was looking after the children in the capital of Juba, where they were forced to flee the violence.
In the 3 years since Rach, Matt and Goy last saw their mother, they have grown a lot taller. Today...
Now, let me say this. Notice she said that they've grown a lot taller. The ancient Egyptians were known for their great height. All right. Like if you read the scriptures, it tells you about the height of the ancient Egyptians. It tells you about the height of the Philistines. The Philistines were the kin of the ancient Egyptians. All right. Like you have the Dinka tribe today, the Watusi tribe. They're known for being 7-8 feet tall. All right. Those are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians.
Today they prepare to leave the place they've called home since the Civil War began.
When the fighting broke out, the boys sought protection at this UN camp. Up north, their mother also fled the violence, crossing the border into Ethiopia.
The boys had no idea if their mother was even alive until now. They've been living on the kindness of their elderly neighbor. It won't be easy for Nyayik Panyang to say goodbye. I love them as if they were my own, she told us. In the long months when they yearned for their mother, soccer kept them going.
And see, now this is something that's very important for the so-called black man of the Americas to understand, because of a lot of these so-called pro-black or Afrocentric teachings, they get caught up in a lot of this stuff. Just because a nation of people are extremely dark and have, that look similar to blacks of the captivity of the Western society, it doesn't make them the same people. The same way that if you walk up to a Japanese man and you tell him that he's the same as a Chinese man, he'll tell you, no, I'm not. Right? If you walk up to an East Indian man and you tell him that he's the same as an Arabic man because they look similar, he'll tell you, no, I'm not. But once again, that goes back to the premise that I stated, that so-called blacks, here in the Americas, we have no culture. So we're trying to grab on and graft into some other culture that we find to be illustrious. All right. But if you want to know who the Egyptians are today, like think of the basketball player Manute Bol. Right. He was a descendant of the ancient Egyptians. Or the basketball player with the Lakers, Luol Deng. Right. Those are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians. All right. They will tell you that they're African. They won't tell you that they're black, and they'll give you their tribe. All right. Because that's what you do when you have a real culture. You don't give your race as a skin color. Right now, the ancient Egyptians were pushed down into the interiors of so-called Africa when they were conquered by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and then the Greeks and the Romans. They got pushed down into the interior, and then that land was finally conquered by the Arabs, and then lastly the Ottoman Turks. All right, that's why the people look how they look today up in that land of Egypt, and even still today in Egypt, you still have people who are very, very dark, because originally these were the people that were in the land. These guys that you see right now in the screen, they were the original inhabitants.
Who's the best at soccer?
They will miss the local championships next month, but who cares when all you dream about is seeing the mother you thought was dead? She will carry my younger brother, says 12-year-old Matt, and then she will hug us all. His 15-year-old brother Rich quickly adds, and if my mom has some money, he says, I will...
And see how they've been completely westernized? Look, they all got haircuts like the black man does in America. They all got the Caesar.
Ask a descendant to our caretaker to thank her for looking after us. There are lots of firsts today. The first time in an aeroplane, the first time in my wit, and the first time they are the center of so much attention. Their mother, Yuangan Chai, reunited with her boys. We have to learn about each other again, she says.
And you see that that house in the background, that cone-shaped house in the background, right over the little boy's head. The little boy in the blue shirt, right over his head, you see that house in the background. That's very, very, very similar to the domiciles of the ancient Egyptians.
Says, it's been bad, but now I can be with them always. Their two older sisters cannot contain...
Now, if you saw these people in the street, you would know instantly that they're so-called Africans. You would know that they're not so-called blacks of the captivity. Just because they're dark-skinned, they look different.
Themselves.
Now, the white man tells you, well, that's true. They look different because your ancestors were raped by our ancestors, or black women slept with white men. That's a false narrative. That's phony. All right.
And it's all too much for Matt. Just for a while, it is time to forget the horrors they have witnessed. Today, they can be children again.
This is a story echoed across South Sudan. Soldiers come in the dead of night, killing civilians and separating families.
Yes, under the orders of the Western powers, who are told to go do that to initiate a civil war so that they can come in and take the natural resources, take the oil.
Thousands of children have gone missing, and many more have been forced to become child soldiers.
Yes, thousands have gone missing because they're getting sold into child sex slave trafficking. That's why. Or to have their organs harvested.
Scale?
Wow, Deborah Pata, thank you so much. Even if you don't understand the language or you don't understand the culture, you certainly understand the love and emotion that those people felt when they're reunited.
And they're the lucky ones.
Yes, that's right.
They're the lucky
so
ones.
Many that don't,
so many families
don't have
apart.
that thing.
Horrible.
Very, very nice. Thank you, Deborah. Reporting from South Sudan this morning. Samsung is attempting...
But anyway, that was the point of the video. Just to show you off of the first part when we saw the fictitious depiction of an ancient Egyptian or whoever that was, maybe a Ptolemaic dynasty noble who was a part Caucasian and part native heritage, but to how the ancient Egyptians actually looked. All right. And who their descendants actually are. All right. So peace.